Here we are, basketball fans, just a couple weeks left of the regular season before we get that sweet tournament time. And I've got Michael McCleary next to me to help talk some hoops. Michael, how are you doing?
I'm doing really good. It's been a long week, but I'm excited for the weekend.
I am. It's gonna be a fun weekend high school basketball wise. We've got the Super Bowl as well to think about, and March just around the corner. So here we go. Let's dig in like we always do. We're going to start by talking about boys AA basketball, not because it's the most important. That's just the way we structure the show so everybody knows where to look for all of our information. So boys AA, we had an interesting matchup last week. We keep talking about when is Roosevelt going to lose. They had a tough time with Mitchell last Friday night. We were there watching it. What were your impressions of Mitchell at Roosevelt last Friday?
Yeah, I mean, Steele Morgan had a shot at the buzzer to win it, and that would have been Roosevelt's first loss of the year. It's so funny. I mean, it almost seemed like both teams were trying to have the other team win at the end. Mitchell was missing a bunch of free throws, a bunch of easy opportunities, and Roosevelt just couldn't string together multiple baskets to pull away. And the thing about Roosevelt, I ended up writing about it in my weekly column. You know, Roosevelt, even on a game where that was probably the worst they played all year, but they still controlled the game the entire time. They were ahead the entire time. I don't. I believe Mitchell might have tied it once, but Roosevelt pulled away immediately. If not, there was always a 1 point separation throughout the entire game. But even on a bad day, it's really, really difficult to beat Roosevelt. And against a good Mitchell team, I mean, that was probably the biggest test that they've gotten so far in terms of just it wasn't their day and they got a good team to deal with and they still pulled out a victory. So I think that says a lot about Roosevelt, even though that wasn't the best day for them. I think it just really if we didn't know already that they were the best team in Class AA, I mean, I think we do know now.
Exactly. That was my same takeaway is what is it going to take to beat Roosevelt? Because they are undefeated, but I've seen them several times. They could have been beaten, but they haven't. And that's because they have different guys they can rely on to make big plays. We saw Marcus Phillips come up with another big first half, but in the second half, they had several different guys to step up and make shots when they needed to and play defense on Caden Hinker. They had 5 different guys I saw play against Hinker in the half court. So they've got a lot of different options to them because they've got so much versatility on that team. So to me, it was just what's it going to take to beat Roosevelt? They are beatable, but it's going to take a really good game, and you're going to have to make free throws, and you're going to have to get them on a down night like that to take them out. And Roosevelt keeps on rolling. And Mitchell, was just coming off of a loss to Jefferson, lost to Roosevelt, and then got back on track with the win against Aberdeen Central. So I still think they're in the mix here, but they've had a really tough stretch here lately too, and that could have went a long way to legitimizing Mitchell as a contender. And they're still a half step behind that top level talent with O'Gorman and Roosevelt in my mind.
Yeah. Another note on Roosevelt though. They came into the game. They wanted to shut down Caden Hinker, and to both of their credit, Roosevelt forced him to shoot not the best percentage from the field. I think he was 3 of 12 on his field goals. And then Caden Hinker, to his credit, he still found a way to score. So, that was a really interesting performance where, Roosevelt definitely was bringing everything that they had at Caden Hinker to try to stop him. And, he still found a way. So, I guess we're just sort of only finding positives out of this game, but, it was positive on both sides. Obviously, Caden Hinker probably wants to shoot better, but, he still was able to get some points for Mitchell. And that's obviously really important for the Colonels to win.
Exactly. And he affects the game by distributing and really defensively too. We saw him, like he has all season long, really disrupt a lot of shots. So definitely a guy you get that feeling like he could take his team on his back and go on a 3-game run. So they're still in the conversation. Like I said, I think they're still a half step back. Another interesting game in AA basketball. Lincoln took on O'Gorman Tuesday night, and that one went overtime. O'Gorman, again, still hasn't lost to anybody except for Roosevelt on the year, and had a little test from Lincoln. Is Lincoln a contender now?
Yeah, I think we sort of noticed that a couple weeks ago, where they had that great game against Washington, and their season seemed to be turning in the other direction. I mean, unfortunately, they've just hit a couple really difficult games in a row. I mean, when you have one of your best games of the season against O'Gorman, sometimes that doesn't matter. But I mean, they got some really good players on that team. Obviously, we know about JT Rock, but Elliott Whitney had a 29-point outing at that game. Outscored fellow junior Matthew Ang on O'Gorman, who's been fantastic all year. Yeah, I mean, they got a lot of really good players on that team, and I really think that they're a team that's going to cause problems in the playoffs just when they get the right matchup and just everything fully comes together. Because I do think it's taken a little bit longer with this team just because of all the talent that they have.
Yeah, I will agree with you there. I think you look for positive signs as teams head towards the postseason. You want to make sure that they're heading in the right direction. Lincoln certainly seems like they're heading in the right direction. A lot of these teams seem like they're peaking at the right time. I watched Washington on Tuesday as they played Brandon Valley, and they had two very impressive performances in their last two games. And Anook Acott came back for Washington, and he gave them a little shot in the arm. He got into foul trouble, and they still let him play, and we'll see how he responds. His first game back after a knee injury that's kept him out all season long. He's been able to practice, but they're worried about how he's going to respond after taking heavy minutes like that. So we'll see. They play O'Gorman Friday. We'll see how he responds as he gets back on the court. But he's a game changer. I think he makes Washington, he puts them in that same level as Lincoln and Mitchell and some of these teams, Jefferson, that are just outside those top two right now.
Yeah, and you talk about game changers. Michele Kambala is probably the biggest game changer, maybe in all of Class AA. I mean, there's not a player who's really been asked to take as big of a workload as he has this year, and he's completely responded to everything. I mean, he had 37 a couple games ago. He's been unbelievable this year.
Yeah, I think definitely a team to watch is that Washington team. Haven't had the stability in the front court with Acott back and Zarek Shepard really stepping his game up. I think they're a team definitely to watch. It'll be fun to see on Friday how they challenge O'Gorman. So O'Gorman getting into an overtime game with Lincoln, have Washington come into their gym. They're getting some tests here late in the season. It's going to be a lot of fun to see how boys AA shakes out. Let's talk about boys A a little bit. And as I kind of looked at the landscape here, we had a lot of the same teams doing well as they usually do. I want to talk about some of these teams that we're not so sure how good some of these teams are. And I want to start with one team in particular, Lennox. Lennox, you look at the seed points right now, they're number 2 in Class A. They're not in the rankings right now. How good are the Lennox Orioles? It's going to be interesting because, they've had a couple of losses this year early on, but they're on a nice little winning streak. They beat teams over 500, but they don't really have a signature win left on the schedule. So is this a team that we could find in the state tournament?
Yeah, I mean, I just look at the rankings right now, and just it's one of those situations where who do you replace them with?
Right.
Obviously, Lennox has had a really good start to the year, but outside of the rankings with them is T Area, and I think T Area has a claim for one of those 5 spots too. So it's it's really interesting. I don't really know what to make of Class A because there's so many good teams there, and it's sort of like Class A and girls too. It's very similar deal. There's completely stacked class.
I couldn't agree with you more. We're going to find out how good Lennox is my theory. This Friday, they take on T Area. T Area struggled against West Central, but found a way to win that game. Lennox lost to West Central just a couple weeks ago. So, this would go a long way to proving that Lennox belongs if they can play with T. And then they end up the year with Del Rapids and Dakota Valley. So they've got some opportunities for signature wins. We'll see how they capitalize on that. A couple other teams I wanted to mention. Winter. I mean, they're a team that's been in the top 5 all year, has just one loss, and they're on the other side. They're number 7 in the seed points. They're a little bit lower in the seed points than they are in the rankings. They have done a lot with Blake Vollmer this year. He's getting stuff done. They didn't know who would do a lot of the scoring. Aiden Barfus and Hammerbeck have come up and stepped up well. They played Platte Tuesday, but they haven't had an extremely tough schedule. So I think Winter's one of those teams that is different from the rankings where they are in the seedings, and we're going to see if they belong. And then another team that's pretty low in the seedings right now, Sioux Falls Christian, came into the year as one of the top teams that everybody was talking about. Their record 9-6, but in that record, we have to realize that they've lost to some really good teams. They've actually beaten 2 AA teams right now. They have a big game against Western Christian, who only has 1 loss tonight, and I think that could get them back on track if they could beat a team like Western Christian. And then they have a tough stretch coming up with Harrisburg, Sioux Valley, and Flandreau. So we could very soon be talking about Sioux Falls Christian as a team to watch in Class A if they can get on a tear here in those next 4 games. But like you said, Class A, it's kind of a jumbled mess right now, and it's hard to know just how good some of these teams are at the top.
Yeah, and I find Sioux Falls Christian super interesting. I actually wrote about them a couple weeks ago. Within their 6 losses, the 3 losses that stick out are 58-52 to O'Gorman, 66-57 to Del Rapids, great team this year, and 60-54 to Dakota Valley, obviously the number 1 team in Class A. Those are really, really close games against really, really tough opponents. And that's not typically what you see from a 9-6 team, a team that hasn't really spent any time in the rankings outside of the preseason. I think maybe after their week 1, they were still in the rankings then, but I think they took a couple losses even then too, and then
other teams, yeah,
and I'm obviously after West Central beat them in the first game of the season, suddenly West Central is moving up the ranks, and it's as we mentioned, there's a ton of good teams in Class A. I think it would be silly to rule Sioux Falls Christian out, but there are a ton of teams that have maybe come above them at this point of the year.
Good stuff from Boys A. Let's move to Boys B right now. And these 2 top teams, DeSmet and White River, continue to impress. They both got wins against good Class A teams on Saturday. It looks like a collision course between these 2 teams in Class B right now, to me. Those 2 seem like the cream of the crop.
Yeah. Obviously, Sioux Valley, St. Thomas More. I mean, you're getting the top five in Class A out of those 2 games. White River got Sioux Valley, and DeSmet got St. Thomas More. And one more note actually on Class A, St. Thomas More. I mean, DeSmet put up 57 on a nationally ranked high school team, and DeSmet can only muster 36 against St. Thomas More.
Yeah.
I mean, St. Thomas More has done that to teams all season long. But I mean, back to the Class B. I mean. DeSmet to win these games, White River to win these games. I mean, I think we sort of knew that this class they had 2 of the best teams in South Dakota. I think games like this confirm it, and I'm sure we'll get more by the end of the year. But as we come to the playoffs, I mean, it's going to be an absolute battle between those 2. Once we get towards the championship game, but then there are some good teams down the list too. I mean, I mentioned Potter County a couple of weeks ago. Potter County is 13-1 now. They've been absolutely incredible. Cooper Logan has been great for them. He plays sort of like a quasi center role for them, even though he's a 6'1" guard. He's just so powerful inside that nobody can really stop him. I actually have a feature out in the Argus today if you want to read about that. But yeah, I mean, Platte Geddes is really good. There's so many good teams in this class, but White River and DeSmet, they're the best, and it's really it's hard to see anybody catching them.
Yeah, I think some of these teams have a little tougher schedule coming up here right before the playoffs. Lower Brule has a tough game. Freeman Academy Marion has a tough game. Aberdeen Christian's going to challenge themselves this weekend. Platte Geddes plays some Class A teams. I think they have to make themselves better, though, to get to that level that DeSmet and White River has been on. And it's been a lot of fun to watch, and it really feels like those two teams are destined to play in the championship. Anything can happen. I've watched high school basketball a long time. Let's move on to girls basketball, and we'll start with girls AA. We've been talking about it. We've been waiting for these top 5 teams to clash a little bit. Last weekend in Rapid City, we had Central, Stevens, Brandon Valley, and O'Gorman all out in Rapid, and they played each other. And we talked about it. We thought maybe somebody would go 0-2, and that's what happened. We had Brandon Valley as the team who had a firm lead against Rapid City Central, ended up losing as Josie Hill made a shot with 3 seconds left to take the lead for Rapid City Central, and Brandon lost that one, and Brandon came back the next night, lost to a good Stevens team, and then Brandon took another punch on Tuesday as they lost to Washington. Despite the recent downfall for Brandon Valley, I still feel like they're the only team that's beaten O'Gorman. They feel like they're still a contender. How do you feel about this top 5 of the way it's shaken out over the last week?
I think it really brings the top 5 together. And, I think we sort of saw an inkling of that once O'Gorman beat Washington. Obviously, Washington coming off the state championship, got one of the best players in the state in Jack Wenatanda. They seemed like they were the favorite to repeat again, but then O'Gorman sort of came out and just dominated them, or not dominated them, but they had firm control over the game.
They pulled away, yeah.
But yeah, so we saw an inkling of that there, where the top 5 was getting a little bit closer, because obviously you got the Brandon Valley game against O'Gorman. They beat the number 1 team, and then you got the shuffling of the top 3, and then the West River teams come out and they prove they're a team that can compete. Obviously, neither of them could get it done against O'Gorman, but and O'Gorman actually beat both of them pretty handily. But Jada McNabb from Stevens is probably one of the best guards in South Dakota, and when she's on, I really think Stevens can be a team that contends. And Central proved also that they got the goods. They could get stuff done against some of the best teams in the state. So I think that top 5 is obviously it's separate from a lot of the rest of the group in Class AA, but I think it's really, really close now, where 1 through 5, like we could have 5 different state championships this year.
Yeah, I mean, I just talked to Kent Colesrud of O'Gorman, and despite the score, he was really impressed with that Stevens team, and he thinks that they haven't reached their peak yet, and he's going to see a different team when they play in the state tournament. And I agree. I think Stevens belongs right close to the Washington O'Gorman League right now. And I'll tell you what, they play Friday, and we'll talk to both coaches here later in the show about what that game means, and that's going to be a lot of fun to see and play for that number 1 seed in AA. But really, really interesting stuff as we see a little bit of separation in girls AA last week. In girls A, again, we're going to talk about the same thing we did in boys A. How good are some of these teams that we're maybe not talking about as much as we should? I wanted to touch on a couple of them. Florence-Henry, only 1 loss this year. That was in the Hanson Classic to Lakota Tech. They still have a huge challenge coming up here these next 3 weeks. So Florence-Henry's been mentioned as a possible top 5 team, but they've kind of always been outside that top 5. But they play Roncalli, Hamlin, Sisseton. Okay, we're going to know if they're a top 5 team after that stretch, down the stretch. And they only have 1 senior, so this is a team that's young, and they continue to improve. We're going to find out if Florence-Henry is really a top 5 team here very soon. Another team I want to talk about, Sioux Falls Christian on the girls' side, a team that's beat some really good teams. Their only losses this year to Wagner and West Central, the top 2 teams, and then they lost to a 19-1 team from Iowa. So maybe we're not talking enough about Sioux Falls Christian. They've taken down Dakota Valley and Parkston so far this year, and they play MVP coming up Saturday in the Dakota Wesleyan Classic in Mitchell, and they get a AA team next Tuesday. So we're going to find out about Christian. And then one of my favorite teams to talk about is Hamlin. This is a team that lost first game of the year, which always seems like a season ago when you look back that far, to Flandreau, a good Class A team. And then they lost to Crofton, Nebraska, another really solid team. But that's it for Hamlin. And Cammie Wadsworth's been on fire lately. They've beaten Roncalli. They've beaten Dakota Valley. And again, they have a couple tough games coming up with Siston and Florence-Henry. We talked about it on the boys' side, very influx class, and it's the same way in Class A on the girls' side, right, Michael?
Yeah, and we could touch on this basically every single week. We could find new teams to talk about in Class A on both boys and girls. But I actually wrote about Hamlin this week too. That loss to Flandre in the beginning of the season, it's kind of incredible how much it held them back, because that was a 1-point loss. And Flandre's been one of the top teams in Class A pretty much all year. So with Cammie Wadsworth and Allie Abraham, I mean, they got the nucleus that brought them all the way almost to a state title last year, and they're starting to play really, really well. I mean, they pretty much have been playing well all the season, but some of those inopportune losses at just times of the season where other teams may have been coming up. That's what holds them back. But I think, again, sort of on the note of just ruling people out, I mean, it would be really, really silly to rule them out. I mean, I think they're a legitimate contender, which I think brings the legitimate contenders in Class A to like 10. So it's I mean, this is the competitive class in South Dakota, boys or girls. There's just so many good teams, and Hamlin is definitely one of them, even though they're not in the top 5.
You're right. We could talk about a lot of these teams in Class A, but I wanted to point those 3 teams out as really having a chance to separate themselves with some tough games coming up in the next week or so. Of course, there's only 11 days until we hit the playoffs, and we'll talk more about the regions next week as we talk about some of the tough regions to look forward to in Class A and Class B. Speaking of Class B, let's move on. Girls B. Huge win for Roncalli last week against West Central. That solidifies them as the number 1 team. We were kind of talking about, was it Corsica Stickney? Was it Roncalli? Who's the best team? And then a huge win for Roncalli really solidifies them at number 1.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely was on board with Corsica Stickney being number 1 last week, but West Central has been a dominant force in Class A, and for Roncalli to pull off a win like that, I mean, sort of what we were coming to last week was, did Roncalli have enough compared to what Corsica Stickney did? Obviously, Corsica Stickney's beaten some really, really good teams across the year, and Roncalli had no blemishes on their resume, basically. So, all they really needed was that win, and now that they got it, I mean, I think they're number 1 for sure.
Yeah, and they've got a tough couple games coming up themselves, so that'll test them before they get into the playoff talk. DeSmet, they're 16-1. They're a team that took a tough loss in the middle of the year, but when they beat Flandre the other night, and Kennedy Buckholtz has just been coming up big for this DeSmet team. Makes me wonder, are they a title contender at this point? Maybe not getting enough credit. I don't know. Maybe they need to get a couple more signature wins, but that win against Flandre was a real signature win for them.
Yeah, I feel like we're starting to encounter this where we got teams that we look at the records, and there's some really, really good records that maybe aren't getting the rankings love that most teams get who play difficult schedules and also have good records. So DeSmet's definitely one of them where I don't think DeSmet has played an easy schedule by any means. I mean, that game against Flandre was not an easy game, and they won that game. So, I do think this win over Flandre, though, sort of changes the perception on them. Not that was their most signature win, but in terms of recency bias, I mean, they're 16-1. I mean, how else do you, how do you? I don't know. What can you retract from it?
What more can they do? Yeah,
proven what they need to prove. So I think they're going to be rising up the rankings pretty soon.
Yeah, another team we don't talk about because they're not in the rankings. Centerville. It's kind of come out of nowhere. They only have 1 loss on the season. Again, the quality of opponents haven't been night after night like some other teams, but they did beat Viborg Hurley, a team that has spent time in the rankings. They beat a Class A team 500 Class A team in Canton who's beaten some solid teams this year. They've got a real test, though, coming up as they play Corsica Stickney next Saturday. So if they play well there, then we'll for sure be talking about Centerville. But you're right. There's a lot of teams here, 1-2 loss teams in Class B as well, beyond just Roncalli and Corsica Stickney, who we often talk about at the top. All right, let's move on to our guest coach this week. I had a chance to talk to Kent Colesrud, O'Gorman's girls basketball head coach, and Jamie Parrish, Washington's girls basketball coach. Of course, they face off coming up on Friday night, and I just wanted to get a little flavor. Like, how much does this game mean in the course of the seedings, in the course of confidence, and just in the course of playing a good old rivalry?
Just anytime the two of us play, it's just, it's a battle for pride as much as anything. The game certainly is going to have meaning for seeding, though. Right now we're both 14-1, basically about tied for that number one seed. For better or worse, not a big deal moving forward, depending on matchups. But it's a chance to get better. Obviously, like any time we play, but they're potentially one of the measuring sticks. So as we come down the stretch here, what things do we need to do? And they're going to expose stuff, and we're going to expose stuff to them. I would have to think too, that we need to clean up and get better the last 2 or 3 weeks. So
I've said this many times, but whenever we play O'Gorman, it's important to somebody. Since I've been here in all of my years, one of us has been a contender every single year, and we know each other pretty well. Our kids know each other. Kent and Barry are good friends of mine, and anytime the ball goes up, it seems like it's a big game between us.
Of course, that will start our look at some of the big games upcoming. Friday night, Washington at O'Gorman. It's going to be an electric atmosphere, a doubleheader. The girls tip off right around 6:15. And, of course, last time we talked about it, O'Gorman pulled away. Washington had the lead a little bit in the first half. Washington got within, I think, 4 at one point in the second half, but it was O'Gorman who pretty much controlled that game. It's interesting. What are they going to have to do different to pull this one out, Michael?
Well, I have to say, there was a point of the third quarter where the way Jackalenga was scoring the ball, I mean, if she scores like that from the very jump, I don't know if anybody could catch up with her. O'Gorman did a good job limiting her early on, but you cannot limit a player like that all game long. Obviously, O'Gorman is a team that likes to score quick, likes to play fast. But Jackalenga is going to be able to get to the basket. She's going to be able to get rebounds. She could hit fadeaway jumpers, 3-pointers from nearly half court. I mean, you can't really stop a player like that. So I think it all comes down to just sort of getting the ball in her hands early and just letting her do her thing.
It's just an interesting matchup because I think both of these teams like to play each other because it brings out their weaknesses and they can really work on what they need to do better. You can't play 50% here and expect to play in a game against these two. So I'm really looking forward to this Washington O'Gorman matchup as number 2 takes on number 1, and the winner likely gets that number 1 seed. Although there's still a couple tough games for both of these teams coming down the stretch. It feels like this is a game for that number 1 seed, which, for what it's worth, helps a little bit as they get into positioning. Let's look at some more of the big games upcoming on the girls' side. We've got some really good games on Friday. Viborg Hurley takes on St. Thomas More at the Dakota Wesleyan Classic, and at that Classic, they're playing throughout the day on February 11th. Also, a Bridgewater Emory White River game, and Corsica Stickney, Aberdeen Christian with just a couple losses on the year. That could be an interesting game as well. They could really get on the map with a win against Corsica Stickney, and then Corsica Stickney turns around the very next day to play in the Great Plains Conference Tournament, where they're matched up against Centerville, and like we said earlier, Centerville has a chance to get on the map as well. So there's going to be a couple teams hungry, trying to take on those Jaguars and seeing what they can make happen. Yeah.
I mean, in terms of Class B teams, I mean, Corsica Stickney is probably not the team that you want to play if you want trying to get on the map a little bit. But those are 2 tests for Corsica Stickney, and those are two great tests for both Aberdeen Christian and Centerville. Obviously, you mentioned Centerville, just one loss. I mean, it's wins like that take one-loss teams that are outside of the rankings and just put them right in the rankings because, it's, I guess, in the eyes of the rankers, everybody's just sort of waiting for the game that proves that one-loss team is legitimate. And, those are obviously two games against the same opponent that can do that thing.
Yeah, and then next Tuesday, Florence-Henry takes on Roncalli, two one-loss teams in Class A. Another chance for a signature win for each of those teams. On the boys' side, we got a ton of great matchups, and again, the Dakota Wesleyan Classic has a lot to do with that. We've got 5 games there that all could be really intriguing. But let's start on Friday as Washington takes on O'Gorman. We talked about that a little bit earlier in the show. Del Rapids, Dakota Valley. Dakota Valley still unscathed on the year. Del Rapids has lost a few, but all to tough teams. And then Lennox T area. So a couple good Class A games coming up Friday as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The Del Rapids Dakota Valley game, I'm really interested to see because Del Rapids is another team that has had a really great start to the season, and Dakota Valley's obviously been great and haven't been beaten yet. So I'm really interested to see some of the tests that they have at the end of the year.
As far as those Dakota Wesleyan Classic games, I think Lower Brule, Freeman Academy, Marion will be interesting because Lower Brule's been in the rankings with that one loss, and FAM has not been in the rankings with just one loss. So that's another one that, like you talked about, that could flip those two around. Lower Brule, I think, is a really good team. And then I really want to see what Howard does against Aberdeen Christian, another team. I feel like Howard, I don't know who to take out, but I feel like Howard is a top 5 team, at least a 5A, 5B team, really, really close to being in that mix. So a good performance against Aberdeen Christian could really change the way people see them as well.
Yeah. Another round of applause for the people who make these matchups. These classic games have been great and been great at determining where teams are at what point of the season. And, it's, I don't know, everybody got super lucky this year if they weren't just like seeing the future.
Yeah, it's right. And it's hard for these people to make up the matchups because like White River, for instance, plays in a lot of these different classics. And, you can't pair them up against the same team that they've already been paired against. So they try to mix it up a little bit. So they get Canastota in this classic. And again, a chance for Canastota to get on the map to play a team that's playing so well. Next Tuesday, a couple good games. Roosevelt continues their journey toward an undefeated season, and they have to stop at the Lincoln Gym, and Lincoln gave O'Gorman some problems. That could be a really fun one. And then winter, we've seen them beat a double-A team, a good ranked double-A team at the time, Pier. And now they get a test against a borderline ranked B team in Platte Geddes, really testing themselves. So I think that could go a long way for both of those two teams' confidence as well. All right, Michael, what you said you got a new article on Potter County coming out in the paper today. Anything else you're looking forward to?
Yeah. So on Friday, I'm gonna have a long day. I'm gonna be at the DW Classic in the morning, and I'll be over at the Washington O'Gorman doubleheader at night. So it's a long day there, and then Saturday, I don't get any rest. I got a long day again. I got the DW Classic. DW Classic all day then too. So it's gonna be a really, really fun weekend of basketball. I'm gonna see a ton of really good teams, and definitely gonna have a ton of really good coverage in the Argus for it too.
Yeah, that's the best part, is just seeing so many good teams in one location. Midco Sports, we are really happy to have the doubleheader on Friday where Washington takes on O'Gorman. It's just really fun to dive into that rivalry. It's going to be a hopping gym. So if you can't get to the gym, I would get to the gym personally. But if you can't, look us up on Midco Sports, and we also have the app Midco Sports Plus that you can check that game out on. I think that'll do it for us. Playoffs coming up soon, Michael. We're going to have a lot to talk about as we start previewing some of those big games. But for this week, Michael McCleary, I'm Jason Andera. We'll see you next week.